Good morning, YouTube. Well, today I am in Delta, Utah. I am at the museum dedicated to Topaz City, which is one of 10 internment camps for Japanese Americans during World War II. And I'm sure you've heard of them, you're vaguely aware of it, but let's take a look and learn a little bit more. So the anti-Japanese feeling did not start right at World War II. There were laws passed earlier. I believe 1910 there was one that said that if you were born in Asia, you could not become a citizen. In the 20s, you saw things like this, that they actually made a law that if you were a citizen and married a non-citizen, then your citizenship was stripped away from you. So this is 20 years before or 30 years before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And you know, some of this stuff going on now still goes back different people. Back in 1919, U.S. Senator James Fallon launched an anti-Japanese campaign, and his slogan was "Keep 'em California White." And you know, some of this stuff going on now still goes back different people. Back in 1919, U.S. Senator James Fallon launched an anti-Japanese campaign, and his slogan was "Keep 'em California White." Well, in January of 1942, shortly after Pearl Harbor, people of Japanese descent were told to leave the coast. This was the exclusion zone. You couldn't be on this side. They said if you left voluntarily and got outside this zone, then you were fine. About 10,000 people moved. 110 or 120,000 did not. So it's a little hard. You have to liquidate everything and move out. So there's the internment camps. There was 4 in California. This one, Topaz, is over here in Utah, Idaho, and across the country, even as far away over here as Arkansas. So on April 1st, 1942, orders were posted to San Francisco that people had just days to report, register, and receive instructions to liquidate their businesses and leave. They could only take what they could carry, so many of them lost their homes, their cars, their businesses, furniture, their bank accounts. Carried suitcases and duffel bags. The first stop was Tanforan and Santa Anita. There were a couple of racetracks that were near San Francisco. And they, from April till September, they lived in the horse stables and hastily built barracks. And then on September 11th, in 1942, Topaz was opened, and trains loaded with 500 people and 50 military police arrived or began leaving Terrapin. Took 2 days and a night to get here. So this is a photograph of Topaz that shows just how bleak and dry an area it is. You can see a guard tower there. This gives you a sort of a map of it. It was 1 square mile with the guard towers placed every half mile around with a barbed wire fence around it. And I'll show you a better map. This is a map of Topaz. It's 1 square mile, and barbed wire around it, and the guard towers every half mile, and they were set up in blocks with some recreation areas. The guards were outside the wire, administrative area, but this was a typical block, and different size rooms depending on the size of your family. As we saw, the one would have been this size, and it's 120 square feet by 80 feet. So, and this is a typical block layout. So the barracks were basically plank buildings covered in tar paper that in the dust storms, dust would blow through the cracks around the windows and around the doors, even if you stuffed wet newspapers and rags into them. On the inside, they were sheetrock, and this would have been a typical size and a room for a family. Basically, you got an army cot, 2 blankets per person. At first, no mattresses, and they had to eventually get those. And you could get out and get planks, build shelves, that kind of thing. They were promised them, but they had to sneak out at night and steal them off the pile to actually get them in some cases. Each room had a stove for heat, and they could build a closet. Basically, not a whole lot of privacy. So we're early in 1943, after moving all the people of Japanese descent away from the coast and putting them in all these camps all over the country, and convincing people that they were dangerous, we needed to move them away from the coast. They decided that, wait a minute, why can't we get them to join the army and fight for us? So they did a questionnaire, which is basically it's a statement, United States citizen of Japanese ancestry. It's a loyalty questionnaire. Asked weird questions like, were you a member of the Boy Scouts? Well, you get points for being a Boy Scout. You get points for being a Christian. You get negative points if you're Buddhist. And what kind of magazines do you read? Do you give to the Red Cross? That type of thing. But what it really came down to was questions 27 and 28. Let's see. 27 was, I got to read this, asked if a respondent was willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States of America on combat duty wherever ordered. And think about that for a second. If wherever ordered, could you be in the army and sent to fight the Japanese, and now you're fighting your relatives? So people would say no, or the fact that you're 37 years old or 50 or 60, and you say no. I mean, you're old, you don't feel like you could serve, so that's a mark against you, having a no. And this was everybody over the age of 17, man or woman. So and think about it, 1943, 23, or yeah, any woman is going to say no. They don't really want to be in the army and sent to fight someplace. So it's a weird question, worded badly, and it's right up there with, do you still beat your wife? Well, if you say yes, you're bad. You say no, then you beat your wife. So ambiguous kind of questions. 28 was just where unqualified allegiance to the United States and renounce any allegiance to the Japanese Empire. Think about it. all the laws from the 1910s and 20s said if you came over, you could not be a citizen of the United States. If you answered yes to this question, could you no longer be a citizen of Japan? And if so, then you're not a citizen of any country? Again, badly worded question. But the people that answered no to both of them were known as no-nos, and there was like 12,000 of them from the camps. They moved them to a high security camp because they were a security risk. So even with all of that, with the questionnaire and the loyalty stuff, many did volunteer, and they became part of the 110th Infantry Battalion, 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and their motto was "Go for Broke." They became the most decorated military unit for its size and length of service in U.S. history, and the casualties were very high. They also served in other areas. This gentleman was in the 522nd Artillery Team, helped to rescue the famous Lost Battalion that was surrounded by German forces in France. And once inside Germany, his unit helped to liberate Dachau. This gentleman over here was military intelligence, and he was in the Pacific. If he had been captured by the Japanese, he would have been summarily executed. And this gentleman was killed in action. He was part of the 442nd, and he led his platoon in the middle of the night up a steep slope to a security enemy sniper position, and under heavy fire, he killed 4 enemy soldiers, but he was killed while attacking a machine gun. So this would have been a recreation hall, and they just got some display of some of the things that were built and used in the camp. But this would have been the type of place where they held the Boy Scout meetings and so on. And what I find interesting is the floor, if you recognize it, is homosote, which is basically really thick cardboard, and I can feel it giving under my feet. This stuff just falls apart if it gets wet. So not the most sturdy stuff in the... So even though living behind barbed wire, life still went on. You still had schools. So there's education, sports, football, baseball, you name it. This gentleman started a tofu factory in camp. There was farms to work on, and but they would only be able to supply part of their food. A lot of the food had to still be trucked in. Because they had a pig farm, they had a chicken farm, they had a cattle ranch, but growing out here was a little hard to do. You only got paid about $14 to $19 a month, where Caucasian workers made $150 to $250 a month. So you couldn't really get out of the camp on that kind of pay. And yes, I didn't know, is you could actually get out of the camp if you were loyal and moved away, not back to the coast. And but to do that, you couldn't. You had to find a different way to make money. Lake Bonneville, which was really huge. This is the area of the Great Salt Lake, and this is ancient Great Lake Bonneville. So there were, in this area, we're right here, and there were seashells, or shells. And you could find the shells around through the desert and bleach them out, sort them by size, and then people use them to make, this is made out of cantaloupe seeds and all kinds of different items made from the shells. And people could sell these, and did, and this helped to supplement that meager income from working on the farms. Yeah, in 1988, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act, 1988, and it acknowledged that the rights of the Japanese Americans were violated, and authorized paying $20,000 to any of the survivors, which at that point there were 82,000, which basically means 40,000 people that had been interned in the camps had passed away before that law was passed, before we recognized that it was illegal what we had done. What it really comes down to is a violation of basic constitutional rights of Americans. As this says, in 1942, we had the Constitution that protects us in 1942. It didn't, because the will of the people was not behind it. It's something we need to guard against, and unfortunately, it could happen again. So I'm going to leave the museum. I'm going to see if I can get out to the actual site. Well, I was able to get out here to the site, and other than there are markers telling, like, the post office, the administrative building. You can see there's a stone wall. That's pretty much all that's left of the administration area, is that decorative stone wall. That was where people were being checked in here. But you get an idea just how desolate and how different this is from the coast of California and where the people were moved from. There's basically surrounded by the mountains, but it's a big desert. There's very little left out here. Concrete pad, that's where the fire station was. Most of the buildings were wood, and so there was, well, all the buildings were wood. There's not a lot of foundations. After the war, the buildings were torn down. I'm sure a lot of the materials were scavenged by locals to build barns and other houses and whatnot. Some of the buildings, like the hospital buildings that were set over in this area near where my bus is, some of those were dismantled and moved into town, and they're still being used. But it's quite a thing to imagine, like I said, moving from the coast of California with the nice climate to the middle of a desert in Utah or one of the other sites, and having to deal with dust storms and not being used to having to deal with snow and extreme colds that they get here occasionally. So anyway, that's gonna conclude my my visit here. I learned a lot. I hope you learned some, and maybe I piqued your interest in learning a little bit more about the internment camps and a dark side of our history. But anyway, I am going to get on the road, and I think you're going to like the next video too. It's another historic one. Now that I'm on the road, I can do some of these.